So welcome everyone to the Node.js and Oracle Database Office Hours for May 2019. Safe harbor statement I think you know and love. Us at Oracle. So Dan McGann is not here today. He's been traveling. He's our evangelist in the JavaScript world. Anthony Tuininga is a lead developer here for most things in terms of the open source scripting space. Creator and maintainer of the Python CX Oracle driver and contributing most of the code now to the Node.js driver. Myself, kind of product manager, so I do all of the back-end, front-end kind of work for the team. And Blaine, as you can see, is online, is one of our other evangelists, doing a whole bunch of interesting things, IoT and Python and Node and things like that around the traps in the US. I am in Australia, if you haven't worked that out. So this is a Ask Me Anything kind of session. We've got an icebreaker theme. And then we'll just go straight into Q&A. You can unmute yourself and talk, raise your hand, things like that on the Zoom interface if you're not familiar with it. So I've got a couple of short things I wanted to mention. Instant Client 19.3 for Linux, 32-bit and 64-bit has been released. So we have the zips, we have the RPMs, we have Dockerfile. It's on yum.oracle.com as well as OTN, and the advantage of using yum.oracle.com is that there's no click-through. You can just set up a wget curl kind of command if you want to download for some reason, or if you're using Oracle Linux and have the channel set up, you can just do a yum install. No click-through is kind of really convenient for that environment. No reason not to upgrade. It connects through to the same databases as 12.2 and 18, so go for it. In my mind, there was a relatively short release cycle because we had 18 came out with a sort of rebadged 12.2, had a longish release cycle. And then this is the first yearly release, so it seems pretty quick. So not a whole bunch of features. One little key thing there, if you click through to that blog at the bottom, is that there's a new extended easy connect syntax that you set some options. So you may not need some configuration files for some of the common things you do. Key change for the packages, for the RPM packages, if you're using those instead of the zips, is that you don't need to do any of that library path setting you used to have to do. And this, as you've probably read ahead, you can no longer install multiple versions of the RPMs at a time. If you need multiple versions, just use the zips. Install one RPM in the zip or something like that. Soda, another status change here, just one slide on this, is that the SODA group, the Simple Oracle Document Access Status, so Access Group, have been pushing us to mark things as production because they're comfortable with the quality. And so I've just updated the online documentation for 3.1 to say that the SODA API is production when you're using those particular client versions. You can actually use older clients, 18.3 client, but not in production. There are a number of known issues, aka memory leaks and things like that with the older clients. The 4.0 dev branch, which is there on GitHub, has a couple of new SODA methods, and these are still being evaluated and tested, so I'm not quite sure whether they'll be marked production or which version they'll be marked production with. Max, who's the key in our SODA team, the Oracle SODA team, has opened an issue there, 1088. Just track that if you want to use SODA. It's a pretty cool technology. And he's available to answer questions. And if you ask anything, he'll answer in great detail. Okay, so I have a couple of slides and I'll go through a quick demo of just a couple of things we've got landing in the 4.0 dev branch because I know you want to know what's coming up. This is on GitHub. You can build it. It should build with all of the versions out there from 8 onwards. 8.12, I think, is the minimum version we try and limit it to. And I also have a tracking issue there, 1053, where we're kind of listing progress of it. So just follow along that. Okay, so this is the slide before I go into the demo. So this is going to be a fairly quick session unless people ask questions. The key internal changes, we do this whole big refactoring. So we used to use a layer called NAN, a Node.js layer called NAN, which was a wrapper layer to allow some version portability across versions of Node. That is being deprecated by the, effectively deprecated, not really maintained as well as it used to be by the Node.js group. and they've introduced this new layer, N API, new C layer, which we're now calling. So the driver now, node-oracledb driver is now purely C. There's no C++. So if you compile, you don't need a newer compiler. You can use older compilers. Once you have a binary, because remember node-oracledb is a binary module, that binary is now portable across a whole range of versions of Node.js. You don't need to recompile that binary, subject to the N API compatibility. And then there are other benefits, smaller package sizes, all that sort of stuff. Next thing, bullet list there is Anthony did a bunch of work to try and optimize out format object type. So he has improved the relative performance of that versus the default array output format type. Still have some sort of discussions about whether or not object should be the default, whether that's going to break things. You as users, please yell out, because you're the ones who are going to be impacted by that. Obviously the work that, if we do change it, then the fix is to go and add that out format equals array back into every line of your code, every module of your code. Object is still going to be a bit slower than array. It's just the way it is. You've got to do more work. There have been a bunch of sort of smaller error handling changes, messages tweaked, a few things thrown. Have a look at the changelog at the bottom for the details there. And then there are two things which I'm just going to demo now, the two things which have landed, implicit results and AQ. What hasn't landed is the one we're still taking time over, which is the object binding and object querying support for SQL, PL SQL objects, which is the big one. So I don't have an ETA for that. Apologies yet. Need to crack the whip on that one. I've just got back from a nice vacation, so we need to buckle down and do some stuff. Let's go into a demo, and then it'll be over to you all to ask questions. Let me start with implicit results first, and I'll actually go back to pre-implicit results. So this is standard ref cursors. So if you wanted to use a ref cursor, and the whole point about implicit results is getting a record set back to node-oracledb so that you can get query results back. So traditionally, and now in 3.1, you would do a standard ref cursor as an out bind variable. So you need to use basically bind variables, as you can see a little bit lower down here in the code, that we have to declare a cursor as an out bind variable. So you've got to do some hooking up of these two, PL SQL and the node-oracledb, and fetch it out. Now that's kind of okay, but there is a little bit of messing around. There's obviously you've got to declare the bind variables and things like that. With implicit results, and here I'm using a anonymous block, but that doesn't really make a lot of difference whether I'm using a procedure anonymous block. There's a new, in one of the recent versions of Oracle, 12.1, a new DBMS SQL call. So you notice there's no bind variable in here, there's no colon, anything, there's no, obviously because it's a procedure, there's no parameters passed, but I'm just saying here, return the results, return this cursor back to the calling program. And then via the magic of work that we've done, we now have in the result object, when you do an execute, and this is the async await syntax. If you're using the callback, this result will be one of the function error result parameters. We now have a new attribute here, new property on the result, which just has all the implicit results. And by default, this is just going to fully fetch everything. I'll show you this running. And then the second one, as you can see, we now set result set equals true. And so we get result sets back. And you have to iterate over each of those result sets, because you're going to get, in this case, you're going to get two result sets back and print results. I'll split the screen in two, and we'll see how this runs. In practice, if you excuse a little bit of the wrapping as I try and show two things at once, you can see that for this first block at the top, basically just dumping out all the results, and we're just getting the array back. And here I set the object format as well, as I just mentioned, a little bit faster. I know a lot of people do use it. So we're getting the standard JSON kind of syntax, JavaScript object syntax. And the second is not particularly magic if you know how for loops work. We're basically getting each row from a result set, and then in the outer loop getting this next result set. So looks simple, is relatively simple. It's going to be just there so you can use it as you need it. Obviously, ref cursors are still fully supported. Let's look a little bit at advanced queuing, and maybe I should jump to the documentation, which is on this dev 4.0 branch, because the examples are relatively small relative to the feature set that is available. I mean, the first thing to notice is a whole bunch of constants now for advanced queuing. I'll bump that up a little bit. All sorts of things, as you can see. Delivery modes, are they buffered, just stored in memory? Are they persistent? Are they written to disk? So if the database crashes, goes down, then they'll be still there when the database restarts. When you're dequeuing, when you're getting something out of a queue, whether you're going to wait for anything if there's nothing in the queue and just continue, or you're going to wait forever, which message you want to get in the queue, a whole bunch of kind of options that you can get. And if I scroll down, we have a whole new set of classes and a few subclasses which you can't create directly, but you can set options for how to dequeue, you can set options for how to onqueue, and then when you get messages back, we have a new class which has the message structure in it. So if let me just click down here, and you can obviously look at this at your leisure, but you can see all sorts of options here that can be set. This is how you're dequeuing. Some of these are the constants I showed before. Fancy things that you can do inside advanced queuing. So there's a whole big advanced queuing manual out there which explains all of these things. So these explanations are not replicated here in the node-oracledb manual. Maybe one day if they become popular and there's a big demand, or it's harder to work through the AQ manual itself. But I think at the moment that's going to be the easiest way to keep it. Just go to the AQ manual, it explains all the subtleties, what a transformation means, and I think you'll get to use it quite readily. And similar things for onqueuing, not quite as complex there. Let's have a look at it in action. And so the first thing I think is raw. So in fact, maybe the first thing to notice is that this is what we call raw queues only. And I did know I wanted the doc for something. Demo queue. Okay, so first thing is that you need to start the queue in the database. So you actually use this AQAdmin package to create queues. So here we're creating a queue for a table because it's going to be persistent. Payload type is raw, so we only have raw types implemented in node-oracledb yet. I just mentioned we don't have object binding, so we can't do more complex things. But this lets you put node-oracledb strings and buffers into queues and obviously retrieve them from any application, not just node-oracledb. There's a bunch of APIs to access a queue in all sorts of the languages, Python, Java, PL/SQL. We set up a few objects. This is where it's actually stored. This is the real queue name. This is the demo user that I'm using, the schema user. And we actually have to start the queue. So with those things done, then we can go back to the demo itself, the node code. And if you look at the bottom, I've got two onqueue, dequeue methods. There's the dequeue and the onqueue. They're kind of running in parallel. So depending, order of node and timing, and whether you want to play with these examples, one may run before the other. So dequeue will actually wait for a message. So it will block by default and wait for a message to come out. Onqueue is relatively simple. So in this case, we're just putting a string in. We're just saying literally, here's the string. So just straight onqueue one message. We get a queue name. One little subtlety here is that there's no sort of closed queue. This is a relatively small structure. There's no real point having a close for this. If it goes out of scope, then it just will disappear. But onqueue is relatively simple. And then we have a commit. So by default, this is all happening. This is an Oracle database. Everything's transactional. This is all happening in the transaction. So we want to commit that so it's visible to other people. There are options, which I'll show you in a minute too. So that's not necessary. Dequeue, no magic DQ1, so we're just going to wait for one message, again, commit to take it out of the queue properly. And we have that message structure, which I didn't go into a lot of detail, but it has a payload, and we know by our implementation, by our architecture, that it's going to be a string, so we need to do a toString on that. So
yeah, it always comes back as a buffer.
Yeah, it comes back as a buffer. So the key things here are that putting things in, we're just passing strings, or I'll show you in a minute, a straight JavaScript object, but out is actually a kind of predefined object type that we have. If I can find the AQ message object. Okay, so this is the payload that we're going to get back. So it tells you a little bit about how the message was configured, what some of these things were. And obviously payload is the important one. So as you can see, relatively full-featured. Don't want to go into a lot of the details. Your use case will vary. But if we run this, AQ raw, this is my message. So we're just onQ'd and DQ'd. No magic there. I might do multi first before I do. Oh no, let's do the options. So let's have a look at AQ options. And I'll bump the size up a little bit. So when you get this queue, you get two structures back inside it. One of those is the DQ options and one is the onQ options. So queue can be used in one application for both onQing and DQing at the same time, and you can configure those options. Here, again, in this example, I have the two methods, the DQ and onQ, so I'm trying to simulate a listener and a receiver, a listener and a producer somewhere. In the message, previously we just passed a string directly into our onQ one. This time we're passing a JavaScript object. So this is where we get the pure JavaScript object in, and then on the out we get we're going to get a message of that message structure I just showed you in the doc itself. This particular one says the message is going to be committed in its own transaction, and similarly on the way out, I also here set a wait period for the DQ. So I've got two things going on here. If you want to play with this, expiration is 1, wait is 5. You can load these, you can play with these values and see how they interact. So this means the message will disappear out of the queue if nobody's got it within a second. This says we're going to wait for 5 seconds. So you could add all sorts of timings in here before you onQ and DQ and see how things behave. No particular magic when I do this. You'll get the output of the message being passed options. Multi is similar, but lets you, for performance reasons, DQ and onQ a whole bunch of messages at one time. So here, instead of the onQ one, we're using an onQ many, and I'm passing an array of messages. So each of these is the same kind of type that we saw in the onQ one. And you can see this particular one has the payload, so it's the JavaScript object message. And then the other end, we have the DQ many. And we need to know how many messages to get at a time. So this is the upper limit, the max number of messages we're going to get. You may get 0, you may get 5. If you set your queue options to say we're not going to wait if there's nothing in the queue, you're going to get 0 back when you call this, but you're never going to get more than 5 messages back. Again, payload comes back as a buffer, and we just do a toString because we know by design that we were passing in strings. So this is pretty cute. AQ doesn't suffer one of the small pain points that continuous query notification has. Previous versions had that, CQN. And CQN does some kind of callback, so you really got to have the network set up. Does what we call a server-initiated callback to the client. So if the server machine, database server can't find where the client is, can't resolve the addresses, etc., firewalls blocking it, whatever, then CQN tends to not work. AQ doesn't have those issues. There is a notification available with AQ, which does use that CQN to notify when there is something available in the queue. I don't have a demo of that right here. Anthony has one, and Dan, who's joined, may have one ready. But that, again, uses CQN, so it needs that proper network setup. That's AQ in a nutshell. Great for message passing. At the moment, strings and buffers can be passed, consumed by a bunch of projects and products. And once we get the object binding support into node-oracledb 4, crossing my fingers, no promises, this is open source land, then we'll enhance this to be able to pass bigger things rather than just string buffers. So that was it for a little icebreaker. We've got plenty of time if you want to ask questions about it or ask anything else that we can answer to. And let me try and find my chat so I can see what's going on. So Anthony's just typed in their message. So feel free while we sit for a few minutes to start typing questions or unmute yourself and ask away. While we wait, Dan, you've been traveling. Have you been talking about Node with people?
Yeah, I was at a meetup last night. I got to demo the AQ functionality. Unfortunately, I didn't do CQN. As you mentioned, it can be a little complicated to get working, so I just used the wait forever, which is a really nice feature, actually. Local demos.
Yeah, and you should be able to do events. So you can just do a straight JavaScript event, put a kind of event model in there. Okay, well, no questions. Everybody's silent. I think you all know where to find us if you need to. Obviously, GitHub's a convenient place to share questions and answers with people. But feel free to contact us afterwards, and I'll speak to you next month when I think Dan will continue his lob series, hint, hint.
Sounds good. Have a good one, everybody.
Okay, everyone, thanks very much for attending the Node.js and Oracle Database Office Hours. We'll talk to you next month. Bye-bye.